The journey of an architect in Australia. Sonia Sarangi is a registered architect. She runs award-winning practice Andever. She is board member of not-for-profit. She is a panelist and a mentor. How are you, Sonia, today?
Good, grateful.
How are you doing so many things together?
When you're a parent, the thing they give you with the baby is ninja level multitasking skills.
Ninjas are the way of life, thanks to Naruto. What makes the Australian architecture industry unique?
Houses. Dubai, Singapore, Europe, all those places don't have the level of space that we have.
Have you faced any kind of racism?
Yeah, I'm still facing them.
I feel architecture as a profession is not sustainable.
Oh, 100% not. We're like 40% responsible anyway for all the
Yeah.
world's carbon.
What is the industry vibe like these days?
I've been through burnout twice. Yeah.
It is quite tough. Welcome to another episode of Australia Unfiltered, where we have candid and unfiltered conversations with people living in Australia. Today, we are powered by the Dropout Chaiwala and the Anchor Cookie Co. And we will give a special thanks to the space providers, which are the Aussies group. Today, we have Sonia Sarangi, and we'll be talking about the journey of an architect in Australia. Sonia Sarangi is a registered architect. She runs award-winning practice Andever. She is also a sessional tutor at the University of Melbourne. She is a board member of not-for-profit. She is a panelist and a mentor. So, how are you, Sonia, today?
Good. Yeah, grateful.
How are you doing so many things together?
When you're a parent, the thing they give you with the baby is ninja level multitasking skills.
Well, ninjas are the way of life, thanks to Naruto. Anyway, so I would like to start with what inspired you to pursue architecture. Let's go back to that time when you started architecture. So,
Sure.
what gave you, like, I want to be an architect?
You know, lots of architects have stories of wanting to be an architect from when they were young. So I fit into that stereotype. I was born and raised in Dubai, and it's not the shiny Dubai of now, but it was a Dubai where there was a lot of transformation happening. So I was constantly seeing all these building sites and things transforming, the city rapidly transforming, and I was always very curious about that on my daily ride to school. And then one day, I went to a friend's house for a play date. And her mother was drawing on the table. And I said, well, what's she doing? Because I love drawing. And she said, oh, she draws for a living. And my brain immediately went, I want to do that. So obviously the reality is that's not what I do every single day. But that was the, that spark in my brain going, I think this is what I want to do.
Yeah. For me, it was like someone fed me that I want to do architecture.
Oh, no.
So I used to draw a lot, and I used to be very precise with all the angles and everything. So my parents were like, you're good. And then somehow I got science, and I was a fine arts student as well. So only one thing you can do with science and fine arts, which is architecture apparently.
Right.
So yeah, that's how I started my journey. But it's about you today, so we'll get back to that.
I'm sure we'll bounce.
So what are the key milestones in your career? Like, what were the highs and lows in this journey?
Highs actually are every time we hand over a project. It is unbeatable. That feeling of something that lived on paper or in your head. You literally live that design in your head. You know what that feels like. And so having this group of people then come together and make that a reality, wow, that's a high that never fades. And that's the problem. That's why we never retire, and architects are famous for working till their 80s. And the lows, burnout. I've been through burnout twice. Yeah, whilst in this career.
Yeah, it is quite tough, to be
It is a
honest.
demanding muse.
Yes, you're always on the run, I guess.
Yeah.
And the highs are what we do it for. I think we'll come back to it, the question that I have for that. But anyway, so how has working in Australia shaped your perspective and career trajectory?
In terms of perspective, Australia's. I've lived in two other places before that you would consider as fairly melting pots. So Dubai and Singapore, right? But both those places are, so to speak, along trade routes. Yeah. So people, there's obviously a multicultural environment in both settings, but it's still very connected to the world traffic. Australia is a bit different, right? We are
Yeah.
over in the corner of the globe, and
Mhm.
that physical distance is both a good and a bad thing. So ironically, what I found is that that distance means that we actually look towards the world a lot more sometimes because the world forgets we're over here in the
Yeah.
corner. But I feel like my perspective as a result of living here is a bit more global than it ever was, even in Dubai and Singapore, because those are much more transitory places. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Australia
it
tends to
does.
be like the end of a journey because it is just simply so far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With this, sorry, I just remembered a meme template
Yeah, go for
where,
it.
where the whole world looks like a cat and Australia is like a ball and the cat is playing with the ball. And when you
Yep.
said like it's just at the corner, I'm like, yeah. And that's why the ball is seeing this whole cat and doing everything uh,
Yep.
to make itself better or
And
maybe save itself.
And to get back to your second part of your question, which is the trajectory,
Hmm.
I feel like the where I've ended up now with my own practice is not a trajectory I could have actually had in either of those other places, in Dubai or Singapore. In those places, it's a lot more larger businesses. So this idea of being able to even start my own small business
Yeah.
would just not have been possible in those two places. Still possible.
Yeah, it's still possible. Yeah.
Mm.
As you said, like you never thought that you would have a practice in other countries, and this
Mm.
country actually provided you with that opportunity.
Mm.
So now we'll be talking about building career in Australia
Mm.
as an architect. So how did you navigate the challenges of establishing yourself in this industry in
It's
Australia?
Yeah. So when I arrived in Australia, I already had 3 years of overseas experience in Singapore, and similar to a lot of other industries, overseas experience is often devalued. But the one thing that worked in my favor was that I didn't wait until I finished my master's degree to actually dip my toe back into industry.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of international students wait until they've got their local certification to do that. I quite pragmatically just ran out of money almost and decided, you know what, I need to start working again as a student. So I applied, and what happened was, because I was actually applying for a very specific contract role or like a student role, it just made that threshold slightly easier to cross.
Yeah.
However, I did benefit from the luck in that what the business was looking for matched, fortunately, the exact overseas experience I had, which is the business was looking for a bit more experience with apartments and higher and
Alright,
medium renses,
okay.
medium rise,
Yeah.
and that was exactly what I had from Singapore. So some of that did get valued, but my, lack of familiarity with local construction techniques was definitely a bit of a hurdle for me to get
Yes.
in. And once I got in, interestingly, I found that the challenges were harder coming from within the industry and acceptance from the industry rather than from the other players in the industry. It was so much easier to connect with clients, builders. They
Yeah.
didn't bat an eyelid if I went on site. Councils, So that was very interesting, I thought.
Yeah, I think I've been facing something similar in my journey right now. Okay. So, any pivotal moments that defined your career path or changed a bit? Like as you said, like there were twice you thought like you would leave architecture, but then you came back up, and now you have your own practice. So, yes, tell us more about that.
Well, interestingly, both those turning points were related to burnout,
Mhm.
which we know the younger generation, even younger than me, is dealing a lot with, and it it the first instance was a disillusionment with architecture in general. But then I thought, you know what if it is just the intensity of working in large practice in architecture in Singapore?
Yeah.
And I thought maybe practice of the industry is a bit different elsewhere. So then I decided go back to academia and try it in a new settings, which is what Australia was. But that was less of a turning point. So when I finished my master's, went back into the industry and again suffered burnout through other reasons. And one fine day, I actually bumped into one of my, I think, ex-tutors, and they said, like, you should go for that PhD. And it felt like such an easy exit. Oh, it'll be almost out of architecture, but still in. You don't waste your qualification. And which desi parent doesn't like hearing that their child is a doctor, right? PhD doctor. So I was like, ooh, this is tempting. But I just knew that no was the right answer because it didn't spark anything in me.
Yeah.
So that was a real sliding doors moment, because
Mhm.
it at that point of burnout, it would have been so easy to go, yep.
Yeah.
So that was one. The other one was saying yes. And that was to a colleague that I was moonlighting with, kind of on a side project like a
Yeah.
lot of us
Yeah.
do. And he was going out on his own. And I was like, I wish you well, we've been moonlighting, but you go off, you do your thing. And he's like, it's been so great working together. Have you thought about, let's do this together? And I was terrified.
Yeah.
But I got over the fear. And 48 hours later, I said yes. And now we have a practice together.
That's awesome.
So it's a mix of saying no and a mix of saying yes.
That's a good way. That's how life is, right? You have to go through some no's to get some yeses.
Listen to your heart.
Yeah.
And don't let fear stop you.
Makes sense. True. Alrighty. So let's talk about architecture in Australia now. What is the industry vibe like these days?
Vibe. It is certainly challenging economic conditions.
Mhm.
Having said that, we're now in our 10th year of business. And we've generally, I've personally seen, just as a small practitioner, it's quite different if you're in, large infrastructure projects. It's been 3-year cycles almost, which is interesting, and that kind of almost coincides with election cycles and promises. Won't go there. But we've had kind of, it's a very cyclical industry. So you tend to, over time, be less daunted by the cycles. You just kind of, in the good times, try to lay the groundwork for the rough times. Does that make sense? So the vibe, currently, challenging, but I think we're past bottom.
That's good. That's good to know. That's good for the young graduates who are looking.
Yeah.
Maybe they're looking for jobs and not going back to their own countries. The people living over here. It's a good thing to know. And all right. So how is architecture perceived in Australia compared to other parts of the world? Like, you have been to Singapore and you have been to Dubai and now Australia.
Yeah.
And obviously you might have seen India as well. So
this is one that's usually a culture shock to most students, international students in particular. So as you would know, in some parts of the world, you pretty much can't do a project without an architect. Like, it's required. Definitely the case in Italy and Singapore. Like, you doing anything building related is architect. Australia is an outlier in that instance, in that partly because of its settler colonial roots, the role of the draftsman, lack of talent, literally, it's something that's, quite part of society. So this idea that there are alternate providers, sometimes you can go to the builder directly. So unfortunately, it's not the same as other places. And I think as a result, and if you also factor in this slight tall poppy syndrome, which can happen when, it's a white collar profession, it is very rightly associated with, privilege and power. So, that makes it very different to the other settings that I've been in. It's perceived very differently.
Yeah. Well, okay, I'm just comparing it to India. I do not know about Dubai or Singapore. You do not need architects in India as well.
Yep.
People just build.
That's true. Yeah, that's going to the builder model straight, pretty much. Yeah.
So my father, like, he asks me for some plans. I take some time because I'm thinking, I'm building for my father. I want it to be perfect. And then he gets it done from someone for free, and then it's all done. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Well, so that happens. So I think it's the similar over here.
That is changing, at least in the metro cities, because I think people are understanding that design has value. So once you're in the larger metro cities, I think there is definitely a role for the architect there.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. I'll just tell you a story of my father, because now we have started the conversation.
Go for it.
So I redesigned my whole terrace.
Okay.
And I asked him to put white granite.
Right.
Which is a thing, right? White granite is a thing.
It is a thing.
He said, no, it's not a thing. I'm like, I have done 5 years of, education in this, 2 years of masters. Like, this for sure, this material, I gave him the materials, like, no, because he wanted to get it from one of his known friends that he was getting it. And then I came back to Australia. I gave him all the designs. He said, he never showed me what is happening. Okay. I thought white granite would be put, but when I went back, it was all black again.
Oh no.
But it doesn't look bad. But what happens? It's in Jaipur. And
dusty.
Dust plus the heat. So now it's on the terrace, right? It's for the planters. So I made it white so that you can at least put your hands and
eat
whatever. But now it gets super warm. You cannot even
Yeah.
water those plants because it's so warm.
Yeah, some of that
It's-
is the parent trap, where the parents like, my child doesn't know enough. Too bad if I put them through
Yeah.
through university. I mean, I have a version of that story, but I think that's a great example of how people sometimes think that we're just here for the aesthetics of building, but there's so much underneath every design
Yeah.
decision. Whether it's whether it's the slipperiness or the ability to reflect heat, there's so much underneath. What is that word? 99% of design is invisible.
Yes, it is invisible. You don't see it. I just tell my dad, like, I am an architect. I do not design like how it should look. I design for how you should live
and how it
there,
should perform.
how
Yeah.
it should perform. Like it is the smaller things actually.
Yeah.
But then, well, please, everyone, go to your architects and listen to them. They'll save you money.
And your architect should listen to you too.
Yeah.
It's a two-way conversation.
Two-way conversation, yes.
It's architecture is such a slow profession, and it's always, it takes time to build buildings. So you're really on a journey together. So there's two-way conversations.
It is a two-way. Both need to understand each other.
100%.
And Pinterest doesn't work always. So for both the parties. Okay. What makes the Australian architecture industry unique? Like we have already said, like the negative kind of, but what is the positive?
Yeah. There's heaps. But, you particularly realize this when you go and see how Australian architecture is covered in overseas media. As I said earlier, remember how I said it would have been hard for me to set up a small practice in a lot of those other locations? The one thing that Australian architecture really stands out globally is our houses. Because guess what? Dubai, Singapore, Europe, all those places don't have the level of space that we have.
Yes.
We literally do. I mean, let's not go into how we've acquired it, etc., but we have space. And so the ability, that dream to still have the grand design or whatever it is, that still is a possibility in a way that it is not possible in a lot of other settings, just out of pure density. Right. So the branding of Australian architecture comes back to houses, and a lot of it also has to do with the indoor-outdoor, which we like to whinge about Melbourne's weather so much. Having said that, and putting the craziness aside, it's still not as challenging as other weather conditions. We're not dealing with snow.
Yeah.
Yes, we have extreme heat periods, but we don't have extreme cold periods. Our winters are still
they're good.
Yeah, they're still bearable. No snow happening. So because of those things, that indoor-outdoor is possible for a much longer portion of the year.
Yeah.
So those are the things I think, globally, where Australia is kind of shining, so to speak, Australian architecture. The other thing is our investment in education, really. Slowly now, with all that first tranche of primary, secondary, and even university buildings, we're really getting quite a reputation for being leaders in education design.
Yes.
Yeah, I really feel so.
That I've seen. Like I've seen some projects that UniMel, the new
excellent projects. Yeah, and it's not just about, as you said, it's about how it performs, right? And so it's also changing the way the education is done, creating those spaces, which is so transformative for the next generation.
Yes. I came for that education over here. I saw robotics lab of the Melbourne Uni. You can see it from outside the building. Right. So that is one of the things people should know about this technology, and that's what inspires you to get into the field. So I get you. Yeah. So yeah, that's good to know. And what are the shortcomings of being an architect in Australia? Other than builders taking our work, but
no, I know some lovely builders who actually love working with architects. So I'm not going to throw them under the bus. Look, the biggest shortcoming is that increasingly, just architecture as a practice is becoming less and less viable. And the reasons for that is not just industry specific. It is actually quite Australia specific too. We're not going to start with the climate crisis and all that. But if you factor in that we have an extremely tight labor market, we have very high labor costs. Our materials are shipped from very far away, so all our materials cost much more than they do than in other places. And most of our materials are shipped, although some you can get a lot locally, Bricken specifically. But so there's that compounding, and then of course there's the way the financial system works and the tax system works, which is housing is basically your biggest investment, tax, etc., etc., etc. So all that is such a hot mess and has made construction so expensive. And I can't say that that's architecture's doing. Do you know what I mean? So within that, trying to make projects feasible and actually getting them to be realized is getting increasingly harder and harder, even with residential, which is, the bread and butter. So, that association with privilege, unfortunately, is becoming more and more. It's really great that we're having the conversation now about housing affordability, because it is long overdue.
Yes.
But yeah, that is part of the reason why it's becoming increasingly harder and harder. Like, I do not imagine, and this is more not a warning but a word of advice. I do imagine that going forward, the next cohorts, it's not so much that they're going to be just a registered architect with their practice. They have to be architect /something /something. I'm sort of already slightly a slashy, but not as much. But yeah, that's probably what I imagine.
Yeah, that's good. I was just thinking when you said about the housing crisis which is happening, I think it's all over the world currently. It's not just Australia.
No, yeah, that's right. But it's exacerbated by all the way our tax system works, which is very different to how the tax system and the politics works in other places.
Yes, true.
So, they're all similar, same, but different.
Different, yes. True.
Having said that, Singapore has done a brilliant job with housing affordability. They have to be credited with that. And that takes consistent, motivated government direction over time. Of course, their government system is completely different, and that's a whole other kettle of fish. But that consistency and clarity and government-driven intervention can resolve that. So they're the outlier in that conversation.
If we compare India and Australia, so in Australia, as you're saying, like, it is very expensive currently to build a house, to own a house, and obviously there are governments playing a big role. Similarly, in India, what happens, what I feel, there's a trend of just copying what is happening in the Western worlds, and they're not taking the good parts of it. So obviously the government has taken the bad parts, and the builders have taken the bad parts, or the good parts maybe, but the major part is actually creating public spaces also. If you're in Australia, especially in Melbourne, the city of gardens, you have gardens everywhere. You can go around with your dogs and you can just go for a walk. There are open gyms everywhere. The things are coming in, but then they're again walled everywhere. So even the open gym would be in a walled park. So,
right.
So what do you think about that?
I do believe with a lot of what you're describing, sort of, these mistakes, there always is this pendulum process with societies. I've seen that in Dubai. I've seen that in Singapore, actually. So with Dubai, all that glitz and glamour you saw, they went so hard into that they lost their soul. And it's so hard to reclaim it. They've done a decent job of trying to, and they've done less good job of connecting with their landscape, because the creek used to be the heart of Dubai. That's near where I was born, and that was the hub of Dubai. But now it's out in the desert, but you don't have anything anchoring. So then you have to create something artificial like a marina, right? So they've still not reconnected with the landscape. Singapore, they've done a much better job of reconnecting the landscape. Gardens by the Bay, like, they've always remembered the landscape. Of course, they're a tropical setting, so easier to remember landscape because it's so lush. They've done a good job of retaining that, but they also went very hard on the glass and concrete. And, heritage fell through the cracks. But then also the attitude heritage initially was just preserve in formaldehyde, but that kills heritage. You need to let heritage breathe. You need to be less precious with it. Let it change. That's where some parts of India get it so right. When you have such a long continuous history, you don't have that preciousness with heritage. You kind of constantly adapt and add to it. So that's kind of some of the pendulums that will happen. And yes, with India, there is a lot of excess privatization happening. And I think with time, and of course it does take citizens also driving it slightly, the pendulum will swing back. That does tend to happen.
It's about understanding why we need design in daily life.
Correct.
And open design, to be honest. So
public, I suppose.
Public.
Yep.
Public
and
design.
Not public spaces that are private owned.
Yeah.
Because currently the default tends to be indoor environments like malls, and that's really not good for our mental health.
I remember, like, in India, this is a trend right now, especially in Mumbai, that they have nets for cricket.
Right.
And I remember playing cricket in the gardens and on the streets. But now everyone is like, no, you cannot play over here. So people have actually made it a business.
Right.
They literally have netted their terraces or the open space, and then they say you can play cricket over here, and then they get money out of it.
But that changes the way you play.
Yeah, it does.
Because you play so different when you're trying to get a boundary versus just hitting it in a net. That's interesting.
Anyway, let's So, talking about trends that are changing, let's get back to trends in sustainability in Australia.
Mm.
What trends are currently shaping architecture industry in Australia, according to you?
Um, we're long overdue and late to it, but the silver lining from the affordability and construction cost thing is we are finally getting our head around to retrofitting.
Mm-hmm.
Europe has beaten us to that by decades, simply because they just didn't have the space. And of
Yeah.
course, they have a lot more, heritage and things to be mindful of. So we're finally getting serious about retrofitting, because I remember when I first came, I was, that I'm proud of it, that Desi attitude of it's perfectly good. Why do you need to break it? Right? Why not reuse it? Why not repair it?
Yeah.
If something's broken, you repair is the first thing you think. But that was not the default when I first came here. The default was, oh, it's too hard. Let's just tear it down and start again. And we're finally leaving that behind, I think.
Yeah.
Not all parts of the industry. And yes, I understand not every building can be.
Yeah.
But then when we factor in carbon and the fact that there's a lot of carbon in that existing building,
Mm-hmm.
and that so much has improved to be able to improve an old building in terms of thermal and keeping heat and cold out, there's really no excuses anymore.
Makes sense. Yes. Talking about like sustainability again, I feel architecture as a profession is not sustainable.
Oh, 100% not. We're like 40% responsible anyway for all the
Yeah.
world's carbon.
Like obviously,
Guilty, blood on our hands.
Yeah. Like if you take out some mud also from a land or sand, you are providing like some machines are coming, some
Yeah,
people are coming.
that's right.
So we cannot be sustainable in that way. We cannot call ourselves sustainable. Actually, non-sustainability helps us.
Yeah, that is very true. I mean, I can understand why that impression would be there. Oh, you have a vested interest in not being sustainable. I get that. But also, what architects are? We are, to our detriment, we are dreamers and
Yeah.
we're optimists. But
Yeah.
more importantly, actually, before anything else, we are problem solvers,
Mhm.
and we're not afraid of complex problem solving. So actually, our biggest value is not actually even at the building stage. It's so much earlier. It's when the client comes to you with a brief, sometimes you end up almost talking them out of a project and realizing that what they need to do is a lot more humble.
Yes.
That's where you can be really sustainable.
Mhm.
Where actually, no, this is excessive. So you really can be, but it's coming back to those first principles. So yeah.
Makes sense. I did that.
It's how you define sustainability. Sustainability is definitely not whacking solar panels onto your roof and putting a rainwater tank in the backyard.
Thank you.
Not the bells and whistles.
Yes.
The sustainability is a process, a mindset, and starts so much earlier before you even move anything on site.
This is, I think, what the new graduates, be it bachelors or masters, need to know, that sustainability is not about water harvesting. It is a part of it, but it is after water harvesting or solar panels. It starts much earlier.
I have sympathy for them also, because they haven't seen the process of a building being done. And so once you go through that process, you realize how extractive and intensive it is. And I think once they finish that first life cycle, that light bulb goes on.
Yeah.
Wow, did we really need to, did we need every part of that process?
Yeah. Something happened with Dropout recently. I was helping them just for the Southern Cross station. They have a kiosk over there. So they said that they want to build something 3D over there, 3D element over there, so that the store looks better. No, you do not need that. You just need a wall to cover your kitchen so that it looks neater and you have everything in place. So I actually talked them out of giving me the project and told them you can just put a panel over there.
That's right.
And they're like, yeah, let's do that because it works.
Yeah, I know. I think that's the biggest value of architects, making you aware of an approach or a mindset or a solution that you hadn't thought of. That's what you go to an architect for, to find new solutions which, no two sites, no two projects are ever the same. People are like, a house is a house is a house.
No.
So that's what you're going for solutions you could never have come up with yourself.
True. And that's great. Okay, as professionals, as yourself being a professional in the field, is the profession sustainable? Like in terms of what kind of challenges have you faced? And I'm not talking about the environmental sustainability. I'm talking about professional sustainability. Is it sustainable to be an architect in Australia for now?
it is definitely getting increasingly challenging.
Mm-hmm.
In those other settings where I've explained, Dubai and Singapore, the reason it has coalesced into these large firms is because smaller businesses were getting increasingly unsustainable.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can imagine the way the trajectory works with less and less projects being feasible, you can imagine it'll be so much more harder. But even if you take that aside, and even within the larger practices, you take architecture as a profession, and most people are shocked at the pay rates for the amount of education you do. You do what, 5 years here, and it's very different to what 5 years of law or 5 years of even allied health like
Mm-hmm.
physiotherapy or psychology gets you. So yeah, people are quite shocked when they graduate to actually realize what the remuneration is, and the remuneration is a result of us not being firstly taught about business at all
True.
in school, and secondly, as much about the inability of people to value us and value design. But the irony is, when people see something really well designed, they badly want it,
Mm-hmm.
right? At whatever price point they're comfortable with. So people value design, but somehow valuing architectural services is somehow seen differently. But it isn't.
Yeah, it is not.
It's a little bit of investment that always gives dividends.
True.
Sometimes in monetary value, sometimes in joy.
Enjoy. There's satisfaction.
Mm.
Like you have this space built for yourself,
Mm.
and it works perfectly just for you. So it actually.
Do you know how different it is when you buy something from insert generic brand versus you get something stitched in India for an occasion? It just feels so good every time you wear it. I cannot describe a building better than that. When it's a good fit, it is a joy.
It is
every single day.
True. I get you perfectly. Well, have you faced any kind of like I'm just asking you directly in the profession in Australia, kind of racism?
Yeah, but it's a very interesting brand in architecture. You see, in architecture, it's a profession that skews, quite privileged, so upper class. It tends to be where most people are coming into the industry from. And so the kind of racism I've experienced is quite pernicious.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of the, oh, we're lovely. That was not my intention. And that is so much harder to fight or resist or explain, because the other person is not even willing to acknowledge that there is a problem.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm the good guy. Everything's great. We're egalitarian. No, we are actually very conservative profession that is in the liberal arts and that projects quite a liberal persona, but actually functions and thinks quite conservatively.
Yeah, that's hard to know, to be honest, that things are in that way. Like, I think there are unseen walls. Like, I have faced few, you might have faced.
I'm still facing them.
Yeah.
But skin of a rhino.
That's
and so what I've tried to do with mentoring is make space.
Mm-hmm.
Make space. It's hard coming from a culture where you're encouraged to always be humble and just do the work and let the work speak for itself. But you realize very quickly, there's no meritocracy. Okay. And so the irony is, we often assume as migrants that meritocracy exists because we're just in a different setting. But you know how we complain in India and Dubai and Singapore about Vasta, or it's who you know and not what you know?
True.
That applies just as much here. So that's not to say there have not been people in the industry who have been wonderful to me. I mean, obviously, my business partner being number one, but those are people who see you as you first. They don't see you as a box. They don't see you as, insert box migrant, insert box female. They don't see you as that. They just see you as a complex person like anyone else.
That's how it should be, though.
That's how it should be. Yeah.
That's how it should be. Well, that was... Okay, so people coming to Australia, there are many... I have some anonymous questions that I've got for you.
Sure.
But I think we can answer a few questions from there only. I have 12 years, so I'm asking the anonymous question. The first question is, I have 12 years of experience back in India, or back in the country, wherever this person is. Will I be known as a registered architect in Australia, like the person is registered back in India
Mm-hmm.
and has 12 years of experience, will
Mm.
that person be known as a registered architect in Australia if that person comes over here?
Sadly, no. And that is, fortunately, unfortunately, at least consistent, because it's the same. Because architecture is, because we are one of those professions that needs a license and a registration process. It is very similar to law and medicine in that instance. So the same applies if you were a
Yeah.
lawyer or a doctor moving to Australia.
All
So
right.
registration is not mutually recognized with India.
Mhm.
Some jurisdictions, unfortunately, are. So if you're a doctor from the UK, yes, there is mutual recognition. So unfortunately, that is what it is. But having said that, there are different pathways for experienced practitioners to get their qualifications ultimately converted into registration. So
Mhm.
the registration boards in each state vary. I
Mhm.
can't speak for other states
Yes.
because I'm not registered in other states. So you're only registered for the state that you're in, which also surprises people. It's not national, it's not automatic, but it's straightforward once you're registered in one. So there are pathways, but there's a few steps there. First your qualifications have to be accepted,
Mhm.
which may not always be the case. I can't go into the fairness or unfairness of that process. I have been the beneficiary that my first degree was in Singapore, so that was mutually recognized as a degree. But in the case of India, I think it's quite hit and miss. Certain larger, more prominent institutes would be easily verified, and smaller ones would be a challenge.
Yeah.
So first they have to accept your qualification. And then what happens is you still have to do some local experience. You can't call yourself an architect, but between your local experience and overseas experience, there are pathways for more experienced practitioners to avoid the more tedious parts of, having to sit an exam and do
Yeah.
basic things. Because the exam is more aimed at, people who have just delivered a couple of buildings,
Yeah.
not people who have delivered lots of buildings.
True.
So there are other pathways. I'm not an expert on it, but yeah, I can't say it's quick or easy process, but there is some process.
There's some process.
Yeah,
That's
but-
good to know.
Mm.
There's something.
Yes.
Because I remember we learned this in professional practice in the uni, that after getting graduated, we need to work under an architect for
That's right.
2 years.
That's right.
And then you have an examination, written examination. And if you pass that, then there's an interview.
Correct.
And if you pass
Which actually has a higher fail rate than the examination.
Yeah. And then you would be known as a registered architect
Correct.
in Australia.
That's right.
So this is actually more than 2 years.
Yeah. No,
After-
2 years is, nobody does that anymore.
Yeah.
It's 3.5 years. So it's a really long process to call yourself an
Yeah.
architect.
2 to 4 years after doing your master's.
Yeah.
Well, sadly, in India, it's a 5 years course, which
And
is
you're an architect at the end of it.
architect at the end of it, yes. But if you come to Australia after 5 years of studying and do your master's, that is 7 years of education, you still have 4 years to go.
Yeah, you do.
So 12 years of experience would also not count. So
Yeah.
well, that's the reality. I think that's a good way also.
Yeah.
So that they know who.
And
are
in which
getting
case, I
into-
would say, if you are one of those people, dip your toe into the industry as quick as possible. Because what people don't often realize is you actually can. So when you're a student here, you can even enter your hours as a student in your logbook when you're providing that. So don't wait, because, at least in the culture I was from, it was always, concentrate on your studies, get your best grades. There's one bit of advice I can give. Sorry, mom and dad. Marks matter less. Take it from a straight A student. Nobody has ever looked at my grades. Just focus on doing the best work that you can, like the best uni work that you can to your standards. But don't worry about that extra 5 marks. It will not matter. Nobody will see it. Get your toe and dip it into the industry as quick as possible.
True.
So that those hours start counting ASAP. And you can work while you study.
Yeah. Sadly, for people who were like me during COVID, we couldn't get into the firms.
Totally
and
understand.
Then we had to take different paths.
Mm.
But now you can actually get your feet into the industry as soon as possible, which is great for current graduates. So please do that. Okay, what does it take to make the jump from studying architecture to practicing in Australia?
Right. It takes immense amounts of self-belief and immense amounts of realizing that it's a marathon and not a race. So self-belief. What I mean to say by that is, as I said, a lot of us come from cultures where there is this mindset of, respect your guru, or, just listen to your teacher and that's the right way. No, I actually do not subscribe to that. That's not to say that you don't listen to your tutor at all. They will give you 4 or 5 ideas. But you know what? You don't have to take them. You pick what resonates with you, because ultimately you are hired for your design skills, right?
Yeah.
If your folio ends up being a watered down version of your tutor's skills, you are not going to get that phone call to come in through the door,
Yeah.
right? The folio opens the door. And then once you're there, that's you. That's all you. So if it's not all you as your design, let me tell you, when you're talking about it to other people, it shows.
It shows.
So it's hard for students to go, what? You mean I should push back? But actually, that is the right thing to do. So pick what resonates with you in terms of the feedback as you're developing your designs, but ignore what doesn't. Because your folio really has to be, and that's something obviously that local students, because they come from a different educational milieu of a lot of questioning and challenging, they're used to that process.
Mm-hmm.
Some of us are not.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And the marathon, not a race. There's, as I said earlier about Vasta and who you know matters more than what you know. If you haven't had the time or the bandwidth to develop those networks, if you start developing them later, once you've graduated, it takes longer and longer. There's something like 70% of jobs, and this is not just an architecture specific statistic, I'm told, 70% of jobs are not even advertised. It's a tap. I mean, of course, the downside of that is you can see why we have a diversity problem. If there's a certain subset of people in the office, hey, do you know someone? Oh, it tends to be people similar to them. And then you look at the practice headshot and it's like, oh, you all look so similar to each other. So there's the downside of that. But as I said, all you need is one person to see you as just you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that can only shine through if what is in your folio before they see you represents
you. Yes, for sure. That's what I tell I also teach one-on-one students. I tell them the same thing. They're like, my tutor is telling me to make this change. So I ask them, do you want this change?
Correct.
Do you think this change would actually reflect your design?
Mm-hmm.
So no, but then the tutor won't give me the marks. I'm like, well, I can just give you, you can create that iteration, but keep this and show them why your version is better.
Actually, that brings me to the point. Communication. Oh my God. The reason why I'm still here is, I think, my communication skills. And I did not realize until I came to this setting what an advantage that was. In some of the other settings I was in, being a good communicator actually got me into trouble. Because in some other settings, they're like, don't speak until you're spoken to. It's not your turn, or you're not the right level to speak to this person. That is the one gift of Australia. There's so much is flat.
Yeah.
You are the smallest, youngest person on site, but you rock up to the builder and say, why are you doing that? And he won't go, who the hell are you to ask me? He'll be like, oh, yeah, because blah, blah, blah. Do you know what I mean? So that works in your favor. That works in your favor. Really work on your communication skills. You can have the most amazing drawings, the most amazing panels. But if you land up at that interview table, which at that point you have a 50% chance of landing that job, if you land up at that interview table and your communication skills are less subpar, that call and that offer letter is not coming back.
Makes sense.
And architecture is so much about communication.
It is only about communication.
I mean, some of it is drawing, but so much of us is standing around, talking to our clients, talking to builders. You have to convince and communicate constantly, negotiate. That is so important.
But drawings are also a way of communication.
100%. That's what I said. There's some of it through drawings, but so much through verbal too. So, but there is a tendency in school to emphasize only the drawing communication and thinking that's enough.
That should look good.
Yeah. And my folio will do the talking. And once I get to the interview, it'll be fine. No. I've seen some amazing students and amazing folios fail at the interview hurdle. Yeah.
That, I think, interview is actually tough also, to be honest. And that's how it should be, so that you're known as an architect.
But so much of it is, now being on the other side of the table and having hired people, so much of it really is, it comes down to the first 5 minutes. First 5 minutes is when we form our impressions. And that's not about how long you're talking. It's about how you're talking, your body language. Blink and we make our assessments of people.
Well, that's good to know. So coming to the fun stuff, and what is your favorite building in Australia and why does it stand out to you?
I get this question a lot. But in dinner parties, I give a much shorter answer. My favorite building currently, and ever since I visited it, is the Te Anak Aquaculture Center in Bujbim National Park. It's by Cooper Shafe, a small regional practice. But to me, earlier when I was talking about that Australia at the global stage, that project is, I hope, a marker of a new era in Australian architecture. I have to tell you, that project moved me to tears. It is, look, we are still very, very long way as a profession to remediating our role and I suppose our involvement in how First Nations history has been here.
Mhm.
Because remember, like with a lot of other indigenous societies, there was a lot of erasing, undermining, denying of the built knowledges that already existed. So, in some senses, because we've started here with the immigrant or colonial built knowledge, we've kind of just marched on with that default. But that project to me feels like such a great reset because it is, firstly, it is so modest, and is so honest. And unlike so many architecture projects that are about the architecture,
Mhm.
it is about the landscape,
Yeah.
and it is about setting back. It is about being lightly above the earth. It is about the most honest, robust materials, detailed in the least fussy way you can imagine. And its journey is not to take you to some exciting viewing point within a building. It actually says the building is immaterial. I will hang back over there. What is valuable is this landscape that has been part of this culture for, I think Bujbim, I've lost the timelines, but could be something like 50, 60,000 years old. And, has traces no longer, but of a year-long sort of society that harvested eels and, had built structures there. Those built structures don't exist anymore.
Mhm.
But it brings you to the water, and it's quite shallow, and it does a very great job of bringing you close to country and to just experiencing country and being humbled within that, because you're on this tiny platform
Yeah.
at the edge of water, and the scale of it, the scale of the landscape really overwhelms you, and the architecture just sits back and facilitates that. There's no pristineness in the pathways. There's no perfectly cut granite. It is a beautiful project. It is very hard to get to because it is out in, out past, I think, Portland,
Okay.
Port Fairy over there. So Western Victoria. It's not easy to get to, but it is so worth it as a project, and a great example of brilliant work being done by a tiny practice. So that is a public project, and it is a practice of 4 people, 2
Wow.
directors, 2 students, and it is fantastic.
That's amazing.
It is more, as I said, it is the first step, I think, for us to kind of pay the rent in the built
Yeah.
environment,
Makes sense.
which is long overdue.
It is.
And is the opposite of architecture, which is always associated with power. But here it is not about that power, not about exerting that power. So that is a project that has blown me away.
That's awesome. For me, obviously, I've just seen things within this Melbourne CBD.
Mm.
But for me, those tier experiences, like when I got teary eyes, was NID building in National Institute of Design in Ahmedabad.
Yep.
That was, I think, I should be here and not somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
They were doing some amazing things. It was not about how it was built. It was how the spaces were for students over there. And they were just so well thought of that your mind doesn't go towards the building. You just see the work of the students.
100%. In this age of Pinterest and design and all these, because images of pretty spaces do attract our eyes.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you're not left with how it looked. You're left with how it made you feel.
Yeah.
That is the power of architecture.
Yes.
To make you feel something. And that is why, home is such an emotional space, because the architecture is just the container, right? It's a container for our lives.
Yeah.
And so that's the bit that moves you to tears.
Second was Sagrada Familia at
Barcelona. Yep.
I don't know what just happened. It's just, and outside I didn't like it. Was like, okay, something is happening. Inside, when I went, I'm not even a Christian, but I was in tears.
You could be an atheist and you could be converted by Sagrada Familia.
I was like, what is this? This is like, that was surreal for me. Like how the light is falling and then how things are being. I actually felt that I'm inside an animal and seeing all those skeletons, and that was something very different.
You line up 5 people and they will describe that building in completely different ways.
Yeah. That's how architecture should be.
Correct.
It opens up your mind and see.
And how you experience it is so much a reflection of what you have experienced in all the other spaces.
Yeah.
We all, as I said, sometimes when people devalue design, I tell them, but you have your own design vocabulary. Every space you have been in as a child, whether it's a humble family home or some grand mansion, you actually have a design vocabulary and it exists. And it then shapes how you see every other space.
True.
So, yeah, it's there in us.
Third space was by the late Trilochan, architecture Trilochan Chaya. He made this Ajanta Ellora Center.
Mm-hmm.
It is like how you describe the place that you like the most. It is very similar to that. It is not above the land. It sits beneath, like you cannot see it at your eye level. It keeps going down. And the unique thing over there is that they've remade the caves over there so that you can take photos, because people are going to the Ajanta and Ellora caves, taking photos, and because of the flash, the paintings over there or everything, it's not like you shouldn't be taking photos with the flash in historical sites, because the paintings get diminished, and over there you can go take photos, do whatever you want, and then you come out and then you see how Hinduism, Jainism and Buddhism started, because that's what Ajanta caves are about, because you can go through the caves and read this whole story.
Yeah.
But when you come out again, you don't see the structure. You just come out of a story and then you're out. So that's what I felt. I felt that is amazing. And all my whatever I designed after that was kind of based, like it shouldn't be on your face, but it should still be monumental, but shouldn't be on your face.
Okay.
So obviously there's Taj Mahal, which is another structure that I like, but then there's Bava. So I think I've come from two very different thought processes, and my design process is very different. I see it. Obviously, I loved the description of what you said, and I went back to what Trilochan. He was my actually thesis mentor, and he
really?
was
Cool.
And he was the director of my bachelor's. So I learned many things from him. He also said, like, architecture as students, you will feel that all of the professions are below you. But as soon as you get out, you will have to start putting your head down. So currently you feel that you're making big things, you're getting drawings, you're giving overnights and everything. He meant it in that way.
Right.
That you feel that you're above other professions, like that you get proud of, you're doing something different. But once you get out, those professions would actually pay you. So you'll have to always keep your head down. So learn to do that. So coming back to what you said, like you have to listen. We come from a life cycle, or what people tell us, you always have to keep your head down and not. Sometimes you actually have to keep your head up only and tell them, no, this is what you have to do.
100%. I mean, yes, absolutely. There's no absolutes. But generally, architects, I feel, draw the line when they feel it is not in the good interest of the client or the future occupant. And it's always about that future, benefit not disappearing. It's less about, in fact, architects are quite adept at solving the same problem 6 different ways, right? So that's why when surprises come up on site, we're not here to say, no, just build it literally as per my drawings. We're there to go, oh, okay, right. Well, here's another way we can achieve it, and another way, and all the time constantly protecting what is the outcome we want. Is the outcome, yes, this is that little nook where the client is going to have their chai every day and just have that joy and that grounding ritual. And so it's just about protecting the ritual. It's not about going, oh, we didn't get this exact shade of this, so we can't change it. Of course we can.
Yeah, we can.
The outcome is what matters, not the appearance. And people think it's the other way around.
True.
So we fight for the outcome.
We should be fighting for the outcome
100%.
in every way, which should be better for everyone.
And a good builder knows that. A good builder knows it's about the outcome and not about our egos.
That's good. Okay, what should aspiring architects focus on during their education?
Well, I feel I've touched on some of that already
Yeah.
by saying less marks, more getting in the industry. The other thing I would say is, with communication again, um, I'm still on this journey myself, but I think in our education with architecture, we tend to focus on drawn communication. We sometimes forget about written ideas last because often what happens is, and I've realized this after giving a lot of panel talks, people come, they're mesmerized by how you've said it and some of the message, but until they've gone and read a summary of it, the ideas don't stick.
Yeah.
So something I would tell students is to not see those history essays you have to do for subjects. Don't see them as just things I need to get out of the way. Written communication matters, because what, when you have to problem solve on site, or make adjustments because clients' requirements have changed. You can't just do that with just verbal communication. You
True.
often have to, because there are large sums of money and risk and other things involved. And that's the other thing. Think about risk every single day.
Yeah.
Where is the risk in this process? And so some of the risks process mindset will tell you, oh, this needs to be covered off in a written communication. And bad and good written communication can give you very different reactions, particularly when you are often having to relay less than perfect news.
Yeah.
A material somehow didn't get ordered in time or whatever by the builder, and you have to convey to the client that now we have to make compromises. Then they're upset because their dream tile is not going to arrive in time, etc., etc. So how you convey that and how you manage that, so much of that is going to be in writing.
Yeah.
So
Just
it really
imagine
matters.
drawing that.
Not going to work because client's mode of communication is not drawing.
Yeah.
So that's that final bridge that is not going to work with a really important part of that triangle, client, builder, architect.
Yeah. Makes sense.
You need to nurture that.
Need to learn how to write, how to speak, and draw as well. But
And negotiate in your writing.
yes, negotiation is the key to success.
And collaboration.
Okay. What are the common pitfalls to avoid when transitioning into the workforce?
Yeah. So firstly, I will repeat, meritocracy is a myth.
Mhm.
So you can have the best folio and still take quite some time to land interviews. So one of the common pitfalls is there is a tendency, particularly with really good students, to kind of mass apply. I've found these, this sort of directory of architects, and I'll just work myself A, B, C, D. Most of the time, they run out of steam by the time they've hit G, because it is such a demoralizing process. I can completely empathize. Silence after silence after silence. You don't even get a response back. That's not to say that the method is not effective, but then the harm that it can do to you and your confidence, is that worth it? So what I tell people is instead, make a list of the 20 practices. Scroll a few, many, but obviously don't always choose the most high-profile practices, right?
Yeah.
First, begin with the 20 practices you actually absolutely want to work with and put in a lot more effort into each of those applications. Go through their website, make your cover letter really meaningful, punchy, etc. Now, here's the thing. That may still not lead to a position in those firms. But let me tell you, that effort shows, because it is now on the other side of the table as someone who receives all these unsolicited applications. Let me tell you, halfway through the cover letter, I know whether the person has actually looked at my website, looked at our work, etc. or not. So it shows. I cannot give you the exact formula, but it shows.
Shows. Yeah.
So make that effort palpable by first focusing your search. Now, as I said, market conditions may still mean that those firms don't get back to you immediately. But you will be surprised by the number of times that same firm who notices that effort 6 months later goes, okay, we just didn't have a position, but actually that was a really good application.
Okay.
It was worth the shot. And you know what, as a result happens? The standard of your application overall lifts. So then before you try, obviously the networking, meeting people for coffee and all those other techniques, you've already lifted the bar higher than if you had just panicked and, understandably so, gone, I just have to go scattergun as many places as possible. So it sounds counterintuitive, like I'm a student, I don't have a right to choose. Actually, no, you do, because it serves the quality of your application to do that. And because employers, even no-name employers, get so many unsolicited applications, it's easy to tell.
Well, that's good to know. And I hope all the current graduates or the upcoming graduates listen to this advice and focus. It's about focus and getting those cover letters right.
In my experience as a mentor, it has taken on average somewhere between 4 to 6 months for people who are applying. Now, that doesn't always differentiate between people who are applying scattergun and people who are applying only to jobs that are advertised. But I'm talking about people who are also networking and applying.
Mm-hmm.
That's how long it takes. And I think there are too many students who think it's not that long a process. But remember, this is a cyclical industry. And usually we are hiring already at the point where things are chaotic. So we're hiring behind the cycle. We're not
Yeah.
hiring ahead of the cycle.
Yeah.
So if things are just picking off now, it gets crazy in about 6 months, and that's when the hiring spikes.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I mean?
Because currently it's like getting the tenders right now. So they do not need people working. They just want to, again, it's about communication.
Correct.
Currently only the communication is happening.
Mm.
When they need more hands, they'll start hiring. But that
Correct.
time, the things might change economically. But obviously, as you said, the cycle, we are running behind the cycle.
Correct.
Yeah, I understand. That's what happened with many people. Okay, so another anonymous question. Should I choose architecture or construction management for masters in Australia?
Gosh, I don't know if I'm the best person to answer this. I feel like actually my business partner Michael, he did construction management in parallel with architecture. It was like a joint
degree.
program in at Deakin. So I feel like he's better placed to answer this. But let's be frank, construction management pays better, 100%. But I have seen people go both ways, which is architects getting frustrated with the poor rate of pay and going, I'm not being valued, going to construction management. Obviously, the pay is way better. And then realizing that the burnout is on steroids for that pay and realizing, oh no, there's this part of my soul that still wants creative problem solving and that is not getting filled. And so I've seen people do it both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is the middle ground?
It's hard to say no yourself, because sometimes until you've experienced it, you don't know which way you land. What I will say is it's not a one-way street. You know, the idea of a career as an endpoint. I mean, I'm a parent of a teenager. And so I feel like, I can describe myself with one word, architect, and, that kind of gives people an idea. But I feel like progressively with the next generation, no one career will ever just be it for anyone. So if that gives you permission to go back and forth, if there was ever a time where you would be penalized less for changing industries or going back and forth between other parts of an industry, I think this is it. So it's not a door that perpetually closes. What I will say, though, that the one door that does close is registration. So if you are going to do that, please just get registration out of the way, because registration becomes a really sticky point. If you haven't done that and go to construction management, it's hard to come back and get registered. So hang in there to registration at least. Then going back and forth is less of an issue, because you can always put your registration on non-practicing.
Yeah. Okay. So if you could work on any dream project of yours, what would it be?
This is also a question I get asked a lot. The answer is very unglamorous. There is no dream project. I just want to work with good people.
Okay.
I've realized that as a student, as a graduate employee, thinking something was super exciting, but realizing that unless the team that is in that project is amazing, no project is amazing. So it could be a museum, but if you have the worst builder or the worst, most unreasonable or uncooperative committee of clients for that kind of project, it's hell. And it is years of hell, right? If that happens. I'm fortunate, really, that between a few early mistakes in terms of early experiences in other practices, seeing that outcome, that when I went into my own practice, one of the best pieces of advice my mentor gave me was know what to say no to as a project. Don't take a project just for the money, because then you have to point to it and say, I helped build that. And if you're not proud of it, then you will just get more people who say, I want that, but you're not proud of it. So what to say no to it matters, but also who to say no to matters. If a client is not a good fit, don't take them on just because, oh, they will pay my bills. Every seasoned architect knows this after a few experience.
Yeah.
It is a 5-year journey. You are getting a deep insight into their finances, sometimes into their family structures. There's so much there enmeshing. That synergy has to be there.
Yeah.
Even with a good builder. Most architects, people are quite not surprised to hear, they work with the same builders again and again because that synergy is there.
Makes
so there's no dream project. There's just, I want to work with good people.
I have another example for this.
Go for it.
It's from my student life, which is in bachelor's back in India. So we got an urban design, like we had a studio, urban design studio. We had to do some waste management for a part in Mumbai, Worli. So obviously I had my ex as like she asked me if I wanted to partner with her in a group. So it was supposed to be a group of 4 working on a project. And she had 2 other people, so they just wanted one more person. And then there were 3 other people who were Neil, Adib, Chirag.
Okay.
Were Neil, Adib, Chirag, and then obviously we were friends, all 4 boys, and this was like 2 boys, 2 girls. I chose to go with Neil, Adib, Chirag, and then myself. Then we called ourselves NAC because NACK, and it was a brilliant, like that time, that project. I felt like I'm in a good group because everyone had their positives. We knew about each other negatives, so we didn't give those negatives. Like if I'm not a good model maker, I didn't get any model making exercise. I was supposed to make the laser cutting and the sheets for how it looks. And then Adi was in graphics, so he was doing graphic design. Neil was into model making, so he got all the laser cut files, and then he was making models. And Chirag was into research. So everyone had their own.
It's quite well balanced.
Yeah, it was well balanced. Everyone knew what they had to do. 3D modeling was on me, so like we had everything there. Like I won't say that we got the best marks, but it was amazing to work in that group. I was in my piece. I was sleeping well in architecture school, and we all were sleeping well. It was not just me. We all just had a good time.
I really want to encourage students. You don't make your best design when you're sleep deprived. Yeah. I was never the student that did late nights. I did that mistake once. I was so not proud of the project and the decisions that I made. And so, you don't do your best creativity in that condition. So it's quite disappointing how that is kind of lionized and fed to students at uni. But I really would challenge that. There's a lot wrong with architecture in terms of the culture of burnout, and that just sets you up for accelerated burnout.
Yeah, for sure. Even currently we are running WishKit community on the side, so we have our own roles and it works seamlessly. So I think choosing the right people to work with, see, you can have different sets of friends, you can have partners, you can have many other things, but you need to choose the right people to work with as well, to make your life easier.
And if you say no to someone, just help them and go, I may not be your architect, but actually this person is able to meet your needs. So it's, at least at the very least, if you say no, help the person when you say no.
I couldn't do that time.
That's for students going forward.
Well, but choose the best people for your group.
You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I'm thinking of my current clients, and they're all pretty nice.
So we come to another anonymous question now, because you have covered all the questions.
Okay.
This person got recently laid off. Has 4 years experience in BIM, masters in architecture, but architecture firms aren't hiring because of the person's experience in engineering, and engineering firms aren't hiring because of the master's degree in architecture. What to do?
My advice would be grab the bull by the horns and address that straight off the bat in your application. So For example, when you are applying to an architecture firm, go, I've got this experience. I've done a lot of BIM for blah, blah, blah. But I need you to know that that is not just who I am. I am a jack of all trades in blah, 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 blah. Basically, take their assumption, take that as a given, and address it head on. It should be something as soon as the third line in your cover letter, or second, even if you want. I am so and so, blah. Because that's how little people read when they've already formed that impression based on your CV. So get it out in the open as soon as possible. So with an engineering firm, where they go, oh, you're too architectural. No, it's the opposite approach. Lean into, you have no idea how much technical stuff gives me joy. Like, do you know what I mean? So address that straight away. So often for international students where, one of the first things people are going to think, what are your work rights? Second line, third line, get it out there. Say, okay, I mean, the immigration system keeps changing, so I can't tell you what line to say because I feel like it gets obsolete in 6 months. But make that very clear, because that is the first point of anxiety they're going to have. I don't think bias, or actually, you know what? Let's just call it discrimination, because I don't like fluffy words like bias. Discrimination, you need to tackle it head on. Yeah. It's hard. It puts more burden on you. But if it becomes that way to get over the hurdle, you have to get it out in the open. The discrimination is going to be, oh, you have a different name. I don't know if you have work rights. Yeah. Do you know?
I know. That's so the name sometimes.
Don't wait for the interview for that to happen. Write in the cover letter straight away. And also in the interview, I think there's no harm when they particularly go, do you have any questions? Make that a question. Are you concerned by, my architecture training, meaning that I'm not interested? And they can then answer that. Yeah. And you know what? If you're going to be their employee, it's going to be a two-way conversation anyway. Yeah. So, and here's the thing. If it backfires, and this is what I tell to a lot of students, if it backfires, bullet dodged.
Okay. Yeah.
If an employer cannot even handle such a direct question straightforwardly, which is, are you concerned by this? And they go, blah, blah, blah. No. If they can't handle it, then imagine what a pay negotiation will be like.
Yeah.
Imagine what, a tough performance review will be like. So it's a bullet dodged when it backfires.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Because, in your CV, every bad experience looks like a fragmented experience. What you want, particularly given, other industries may not have this problem or have this bias, but particularly with architecture, which is just a slow profession, you want to have that slight longer tenure to see a project significantly through. So you need to land in the right, you can't be a square peg in a round hole for too long. Both the entity or yourself will want out.
Yeah.
And then a fragmented CV really hurts your learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Might sometimes help your paycheck, but hurts your learning.
True that. What is the final piece of advice that you would give to aspiring architects or those who are looking to build their career in architecture in Australia?
So those who are aspiring to be architects means that they haven't started architecture school, or have they finished architecture school?
Well, let's just go.
Because I feel post-architecture school is a different answer and pre-architecture school is a different answer. Okay, let's go
pre-architecture.
Okay, pre-architecture. If you can look past the perceived glamour of the industry, because architecture is very similar to a lot of the other professions which seem very glamorous from the outside, but the reality is quite different. Mm-hmm. Showbiz is the classic one that comes to mind. You see them on the red carpet, but majority of the time it's these really hot, stuffy studios. So if you can look past the glamour and see that it is about process, about collaboration, and about communication. If that still appeals to you beyond the glamour of the drawing and the image, keep going. Yeah. But if that doesn't exist and it loses its shine, I think adjust course to something like, and there are very good parallel industries, industrial design, graphic communications, other ones, because they have a lot more emphasis on that kind of, just the visual aspect of it. They have slightly less of the problem-solving aspect of it, which is what architecture has, right? It's that blended art. So that's if preschool. Post school, um, architecture, like a lot of passion professions, it's not the best paying, but you will, if you land yourself in the right spot, be the only person who hits midlife and still loves what they're doing every single day.
Yeah.
And that, in this day and age, we know that sometimes the most amount of money in a role doesn't solve that problem. See, architecture is very high on purpose,
Yeah.
not so great on pay. So if you are okay with that reality, you will not have Mondayitis if you land up in the right spot.
That's a great advice, to be honest, for
Mm.
people who are looking forward to architecture and good.
But it is not glamorous by a
It's,
mile.
yeah, just looks glamorous.
Yes. So if you can look past it, just like someone you love, even when they've not got a fancy outfit or makeup on, you still adore them. And if that you can do that with architecture, then yeah, you can have so much. Your purpose bucket is often overflowing.
I think it's also because of the star architects that
Mm.
people actually see. So if you go to architecture, you won't see smaller houses. You would see directly what
Mm.
BIG has done, what
Mm.
OMA has done.
Mm.
And then you get, oh wow, this is amazing.
That brings me to another piece of advice. Don't consume architecture media. Go see buildings in the flesh as much as possible, and not finished buildings only. If you're driving past a site, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously don't walk onto the site. The builder will have your head on a plate. Park the car. I do that all the time. Park the car, stand on the footpath, and just watch.
Yeah.
Watch the details come together. Nothing teaches you better than the reality of it. And the media tends to feed the glamour of it.
Yeah.
Now, the things that excite me the most is actually seeing projects that do so much with so little. And you cannot tell that from the images. You see that only when you experience the project.
Yeah.
You go, my God, this is so clever, so resourceful.
Yeah.
And you can only tell that when you're seeing something in the flesh.
True. Actually, I had the same answer. I was on a round table in 2021.
I think I read that article.
Yeah. And I was like, the question was, should you go, like, because of COVID,
Mm.
people are not able to go and see other structures.
Mm.
So is it good? And
Mm.
many of the students said yes, now because we can just research online.
Yeah.
And I was like, no,
Yeah, it's not the same.
you have to go touch and feel, smell,
Mm.
and what is it like over there. You will get to know why they're built the way they're built. Only then your research, like, obviously now there's chat gpt, you can learn everything, but you still need to go and feel.
Yeah, design is that cycle and reiterative process. So even if you've got the perfect 3D model, by the time it gets built on site, there's a few changes and things.
Yeah.
And you only see that when you see the final built outcome. And the
Okay.
final built outcome is not less good because it's not exactly like the 3D model.
Yeah.
The final built outcome is what was achievable in the resources, the time, and the money.
Yeah.
Right? And so that actually is the thing we should lionize rather than going, oh, well, it's not as perfect as this image.
Yeah.
The image was never real anyway.
Yeah, it was not. It was
Yeah.
just a representation of someone's idea,
But we as humans are wired to
Yeah.
appreciate pretty things. So
which is good. But still,
resist that.
resist that. Resist that. Otherwise, you will get black granite instead of white. Anyway, that was great. And thank you for being here. But before you go, and before we have the end, we have some rapid fire questions which Sarah has given us. Okay, so I'll start the rapid fire round now. Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Coffee it is. Okay, 3D printer or laser cutter?
Laser cutter. I like the fineness of it.
Mhm. What is your favorite travel destination architecturally?
Ooh. Spain.
Perfect. Mine too. And what is the most underrated thing about Australia?
Multiculturalism doesn't work like it works on the brochure.
Interesting. Okay, this question only architecture people would understand. Jeffrey Baba or Gaudi?
Neither.
Neither. Why so?
too long an answer for that.
Okay, but still,
I don't believe in the the hero architect mode anymore, and I feel both of those people are portrayed in that aspect.
yeah,
And I feel architects who actually are operating from a much more wider social lens are the ones I really connect to. So if you had asked me Gaudi versus Doshi, I would have picked Doshi. Doshi and Bawa are two very different ends of the same scale.
yes, they are.
Doshi is an architect who I feel has touched more people's lives
True.
than any other I can think of in the subcontinent. So do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So neither of those architects fit the kind of mold of architect that I would resonate with.
So I come from the school of thought of Doshi only because Trilochan Chaya was one of the first students of Doshi when he was teaching in SEPT.
Yeah.
And then Trilochan Chaya actually taught me. So.
And it says a lot about architecture education that most people, I teach a subject called Asia Pacific Modernities. Most people still don't know Doshi. Won the Pritzker Prize. Still don't know.
That's okay. I know. So I do not.
We have obviously biases in there, but people are, you can win pretty much the Oscar in architecture and people will still not see you because you are not in that architect mold. But that's not where I see our value as.
Yeah. I was asking Jeffrey Baba and Gaudi because the question was because they both actually experimented a lot.
Yeah.
And then created their own thing. That time, I think the star architect thing was not there. They were just experimenting in their own times. Jeffrey Baba didn't see his major structure still like.
Yeah, that's true.
Not Jeffrey Baba, Gaudi.
Yeah.
Gaudi didn't see. Jeffrey Baba saw everything. And
but I don't see Baba as massively experimental though.
So he was not an architect, and in Sri Lanka he was experimenting in his own island. That's where he did all his experimentations.
Correct. Yeah.
I know this because our bachelors, we had to go and see Jeffrey Baba's structures before we graduate from our 5th year. Because before in Spain, in 4th year, we saw Gaudi structures and everyone was like, we want to build these monumental buildings.
Yeah.
And then go and see what is happening in Sri Lanka and learn how you can settle and how you can.
By the way, before somebody sends me hate mail, I do love Bawa's work. That's not that I don't like it. But it's just you were comparing two people who, for me, sat in the same mold. What I will say about Bawa is one thing we tend to do in architecture is we tend to turn our back on the past and go, everything is about the future. It's all about future experimentation. Bawa was like, my experimentation doesn't always have to be in the future. There's so much in the past that was experimental. I'm going to pick that up and cross-pollinate it with wherever my modern knowledge is. That is the brilliance of Bawa.
Yeah.
So this ability to just choose from any point of knowledge rather than our tendency to just go all modern, or all architectural knowledge is modern only or should be, those boxes shouldn't exist.
To change the question.
Architecture is one of the oldest professions.
Yeah. Tadawando or Doshi?
Again, Doshi.
Doshi.
Because the impact on the most number of people with his buildings is just hard to beat.
Yeah. How do you like the current M Pavilion? Honestly,
I have an appreciation for the mastery because I actually also socially know the person who built it. I have great appreciation for the mastery of the person who built it because my God, the details in it are fantastic. What I was less enamored by, because I was sitting there under that parasol and there was a little water body there in a sari, and I was thermally quite uncomfortable. So I'm not sure if its location as a quite unshaded area, because it's got no big gum trees near it.
Yeah.
That kind of concrete, I'm not so convinced by its performance in the setting that it's for.
Makes sense.
I'm sure those structures work. Here's the other thing. I'm sure those structures work very well in a different climate with a different summer. They just didn't. It wasn't very comfortable in a Melbourne summer and as a summer pavilion. Beautiful to look at though.
Beautiful to look at. Yeah. Okay, 3 local businesses in Australia that should get more recognition.
Any business that is trying to improve the collective condition, such as Humans of Australia.
Thank you.
Any business that is willing to not accept the logistical challenges of operating in Australia and innovates in that. I can't give you a specific name for that, but I think any business that does that, not only will they flourish, but they'll actually solve a problem for so many people. And um, any business that takes time out from just being business to giving back to the community in some form. And you know what? Don't even talk about it. Just go and do it.
Yeah. Just do it. Well, thank you, Sonia, for this. And we have a gift hamper for you for
Oh,
these
should
amazing
have.
answers.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that
Yes.
very much. Thank you.
Um, thank you so much for coming here, giving your time and giving your insights for new, old, wherever you stand, professionals in architecture and people who are thinking of getting into architecture. So before you go, I have another question.
Oh, yeah, sure.
3 years of bachelor's or 5 years of bachelor's in architecture?
Ooh. Hmm. Ironically, I'm actually part of the middle cohort that did 4.
Whoa.
So I'm the outlier. What I will say is it feels like 3 years is too short and 5 is too long.
long. Yeah. So 4 years.
I do feel that the quicker, though, that you can get out onto site is better.
Mhm.
And previously, there used to be this option where after you finished your 3 years, you did a year break, got some industry experience, and then went to masters for various reasons, including the industry not able to meet that requirement halfway. That's disappeared. So right now, I'd say 3 years bachelor's, just so that you can quickly get into the industry as soon as possible.
I have a very different answer to this, but that's Sonia's answer for you guys. Please follow us. Please click that subscribe button for more such insights. And thank you, Sonia, for coming here, giving your time, and giving all your insights, telling about your Australian architecture journey.
Thank you so much for those considered questions. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.